Assalamu alaikum. My name is Alaa, and I am from Ukraine. If you had asked me years ago where my life would take me, I could never have imagined the profound spiritual transformation I was destined to undergo. I was born into a Christian family, a family where faith was not merely a Sunday ritual, but a way of life woven into every corner of our home. My mother lit candles every week. My grandmother whispered prayers before every meal, and I, as a young girl, followed their example without question because that is what you do when you are raised inside a belief. You breathe it before you ever think to examine it. But as I grew older, something began to stir within me. It was not rebellion, it was not indifference. It was something far more unsettling. It was sincerity. I genuinely wanted to believe. I genuinely wanted to feel what my grandmother seemed to feel when she kneeled in that old, dimly lit church, her hands folded and her eyes closed, completely at peace. But whenever I walked through those church doors and stood before the statues, the icons, the candles, the sacred symbols lining every wall, I felt something I did not expect to feel. I felt distant, not from God, but from what was being presented to me as God. I remember standing in the church one afternoon and staring at the carved statues, beautiful, ancient, ornate, and yet something inside me whispered a question I could not ignore. Why are we bowing before this? Why do we need an image to reach the Almighty? I did not voice these thoughts to anyone. In a culture where faith is inherited, such questions feel dangerous, as if asking them is itself a kind of betrayal. So I kept them inside, pressing them down beneath the surface of daily life, hoping they would eventually quiet themselves. They did not quiet themselves. Instead, they grew louder with every passing month. I began to wonder about the very foundations of what I had been taught since childhood. We were told that between us and God, there must always be a mediator, a priest, a saint, someone holy enough to carry our prayers upward because we, ordinary, flawed, deeply human, could not approach the divine directly. This idea had always been presented to me as a comfort, but the older I grew, the more it began to trouble me deeply. How could the Almighty, the supreme creator of the universe, the one who fashioned every mountain and river and human soul, require an intermediary to be approached? How could the infinite need the finite to hear a prayer? One day, I decided I needed answers. I went to the priest, the man we trusted to serve as that very bridge between us and God. I sat before him, my heart heavy with questions I had carried for too long alone, and I told him about my doubts. I confessed the things that weighed on my conscience, and then I asked him, simply and honestly, the question that had been building inside me for months: Can you forgive me for what I have done and for what I have said? He looked at me and answered, No. Just that, no. I remember the silence that followed. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that follows the collapse of something you had built your entire life around without ever realizing how fragile it truly was. That single word struck me like a blow I had not braced for. If this man, the designated representative of God within my faith, could not offer me forgiveness, then what exactly had I been seeking all these years? And if God's forgiveness could only reach me through human hands, what happened when those hands were closed? I walked out of that church different from how I had walked in. Something had shifted permanently. The questions that had been quietly growing inside me were no longer quiet. They were urgent, restless, necessary. I stopped attending church with the same devotion. I began sitting alone in the evenings, turning the same heavy questions over and over in my mind. What is the right path? What does it truly mean to worship God? What must I change in my life to finally live honestly, truthfully, and without this hollow ache in the center of my chest? And it was in that long, restless, sincere season of searching, that season of empty evenings and unanswered questions, that everything changed. Alhamdulillah, Allah guided me. In ways I could not have planned and would not have chosen on my own, He placed the right people in my life at exactly the right moment. Through a circle of friends I had not expected to find, I met the man who would become my husband. A good man, a kind man, a Muslim man. And when he invited me to visit the UAE, a country I had never seen, a world I had never truly encountered, I said yes without hesitation. Something in my heart already knew that this journey was not accidental. The moment I arrived, I felt it. There was something in the atmosphere of that place that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The call to prayer drifting through the golden morning air, the way people paused without embarrassment, without performance, from their daily lives to bow before their Creator, not before an image carved from stone, not through the mediation of another human being, but directly, personally, humbly. I watched and I felt something unlock inside me, something that had been closed for a very long time. I began asking questions, this time with an open heart rather than a hidden one. My husband was patient. He never pushed me or rushed me. He simply answered what I asked and gave me the space to find my own way. I read about Islam. I listened to the Quran being recited, and even before I fully understood the words, something in the sound of it reached the deepest part of me, the same part that had always felt unreachable, always felt empty. That part was no longer empty. I must emphasize this. The Quran does not merely speak to the mind, it speaks to something older than thought. It speaks to the soul. When I heard the verses about the absolute oneness of God, about His closeness to every human heart, about the fact that He hears every prayer without the need for any mediator, without condition, without appointment, I wept. Not from sadness, from relief. The overwhelming, healing relief of finally hearing spoken aloud what I had always, without ever knowing the words for it, believed deep inside myself. There is no God but Allah. He is one. He has no partner, no image, no intermediary. He is closer to you than your own heartbeat. And He hears you when you call to Him directly, immediately, completely. When this truth fully settled into my heart, it was not a shock. It was a recognition, as if some part of me had always carried this truth and had simply been waiting, through every confused prayer, every hollow church visit, every sleepless night, for the right moment to remember it clearly. The realization that dawned on me in those weeks was one I will carry for the rest of my life. Every doubt I had ever felt standing before those statues and candles, every moment of quiet confusion, every question I had been afraid to voice, had not been a sign of weakness or faithlessness. They had been a sign that my heart was searching for something real, something pure, something that did not require me to bow before anything less than the Almighty Himself. I had been afraid to trust that searching, until now I finally understood that it was God who had placed that searching inside me from the very beginning. I took my Shahada with a calm and steady heart. I said the words, the declaration that every Muslim knows, and something settled over me in that moment that I have no other word for except peace. A deep, complete, unshakable peace. Not the fragile quiet of someone who has stopped asking questions, but the profound tranquility of someone who has finally found the answer. A peace I had never once felt standing before those candles. A peace I knew with absolute and unwavering certainty had no human source. My journey was long and sometimes painful, but every moment of doubt was worth it to finally arrive at the truth of Islam. To anyone who is searching, to anyone who sits quietly with questions they are afraid to ask, who feels that hollow ache of a faith that does not quite reach the deepest part of them, I say this with every piece of sincerity I have. Do not silence your questions. Your sincerity is not a threat to God. It is the very thing he will use to lead you home. Keep your heart open, listen to the Quran, and never ignore the truth when it stands clearly before you.